Most suffering is not happening in the present moment. It is happening in a conversation you are replaying from 3 days ago, or in a version of next month you have constructed in your imagination and are now living inside as though it were real. The event that caused the pain may have been real, but the suffering you are carrying right now in this moment is almost always self-generated, built from memory and projection, maintained by a mind that cannot stop adding to what is actually in front of it. The Stoics understood this with a clarity that 2,000 years have not diminished. They did not use the phrase the power of now. That language is modern, but they arrived at the same recognition through a different and arguably more rigorous path. The present moment is not merely where peace is available. It is the only place where any action, any choice, any genuine power over your own life actually exists. The past is fixed. The future is uncertain. The now is the only territory that is actually yours. And yet the mind resists it constantly. Understanding why, and what the Stoics prescribed for it, changes how you inhabit every hour you have. Welcome to Logostoic. In today's video, we are going to examine the Stoic understanding of the present moment, why the mind refuses to stay in it, what it costs you when it doesn't, and what specific practices the Stoics use to return to the only ground where life can actually be lived. If content like this speaks to you, consider subscribing to Logostoic and turning on notifications. Now let's begin. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the wandering mind with a frankness that feels almost confessional for a man of his position. He noted that the mind, left to its own devices, moves compulsively between the past and the future, revisiting injuries, rehearsing arguments, constructing scenarios that have not happened and may never happen, and investing in all of them the same emotional energy it would spend on things that are actually occurring. He described this not as a moral failure, but as a mechanical tendency, the natural drift of a mind that has not been disciplined toward the present. The discipline he prescribed was specific. Return, not once in a moment of crisis, but repeatedly as a practice woven into the structure of each day. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." The Latin is terse and direct in a way the translation cannot quite capture. It is closer to an instruction than a suggestion. Stay here. Not because the future does not matter, not because the past is irrelevant, but because neither of them is where you are, and neither of them is where your power to act actually lives. The reason this matters so much is something the Stoics understood about the nature of suffering that most modern psychology has taken centuries to rediscover. Suffering is not a direct response to circumstances. It is a response to our interpretation of circumstances, and interpretations, unlike circumstances, are happening now, in the mind, in this moment. The person who is suffering because of a conversation from last week is not suffering because of that conversation. They are suffering because of what their mind is doing with it right now. Change what the mind is doing right now, and the suffering changes, regardless of what happened last week. This is not a claim that the past doesn't matter, or that difficult things don't have real effects. It is a claim about where the work is. The work is not in the past, you cannot reach it. It is not in the future, you cannot inhabit it yet. It is here, in the quality of attention you bring to this moment, in the choice you make about what to do with what your mind has just served up. That is the only lever you actually have access to. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic philosopher who taught Epictetus and who has been called the Roman Socrates, made this point in the most practical terms. He argued that philosophical understanding is worthless unless it is practiced in the specific moment it is needed, not recalled later as a lesson. A person who understands Stoic principles about equanimity, but cannot access them in the actual moment of provocation, of disappointment, of fear, that person has not yet learned anything useful. They have only stored information. The power of now, for Musonius, was not a concept to be understood. It was a capacity to be developed through repeated, intentional practice in real time. What this means practically is that the kind of presence the Stoics cultivated was not passive or meditative in the way we might imagine. It was active and precise. It required, in each moment of disturbance, the same sequence. Notice that the mind has left the present. Identify what it has gone to: memory, projection, rehearsal, resentment. Ask whether that excursion is serving any purpose. Return. The return is not a relaxation. It is an act of will, practiced until it becomes available on demand. Marcus returned to this again and again in his journals, not because he had mastered it, but precisely because he had not. The meditations are, in part, a record of a man who understood the power of now intellectually, and was spending his life attempting to close the gap between understanding and practice. He wrote about the mind's tendency to multiply problems, to take one difficult thing, and, through the addition of anxiety about what it might become and regret about how it came to be, turn it into something 3 times as heavy as it actually was. The practice of remaining present does not eliminate difficulty. It strips it of the additions. It leaves you with what is actually here, which is almost always more manageable than what you have been carrying. Seneca captured the cost of the opposite with a phrase that has stayed with readers for 2,000 years. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. It is not that real things do not cause real pain. It is that the mind's tendency to extend that pain backward into what caused it and forward into what it might become multiplies the original injury many times over. The power of now, understood stoically, is the practice of refusing that multiplication. Not denying the original pain, but declining to add to it what has not yet happened and may never happen. The present moment does not ask you to be at peace. It asks only that you be here, that you bring whatever capacity you have to what is actually in front of you, rather than to the reconstructed past or the imagined future. That is a demanding ask because the mind is trained by habit to wander, and wandering feels, in the moment, like thinking. But there is a difference between thought that serves the present and thought that merely substitutes for it. The Stoics spent their lives learning to tell the difference. So can you. Not perfectly, not without interruption, but with increasing precision over time. Suffering, in the Stoic understanding, is not something that happens to you. It is something that the unexamined mind constructs, and constructs mostly from material that has nothing to do with this moment. Understand that genuinely in practice rather than in theory, and the construction slows. Not because life becomes easier, because you stop building what was never necessary. Suffering is not something that happens to you. It is something the unexamined mind constructs, mostly from material that has nothing to do with this moment. That is the sentence I hope you carry from today's video. Not as comfort, but as a direction, toward the only place where anything can actually be done. If this video shifted something in how you see your own mind, and where it tends to go, consider liking it, because this kind of thinking, the kind that locates the source of suffering more precisely than we usually allow ourselves to, deserves to reach people who are ready to look there. Every like extends the conversation, and if you're willing, leave a comment. Write down one thing your mind keeps returning to, a past event or a future fear, that is pulling you out of the present. Name it plainly, because the Stoics understood that seeing a pattern is the first step toward not being governed by it. You cannot work with what you have not acknowledged. The awareness you are looking for starts in this moment. With that honesty, subscribe to Logostoic and turn on notifications, because the practice of returning to the present is not something you settle once and keep. It is renewed every day, in every moment of disturbance. We will keep meeting you in that practice. May you find the present moment not as an escape from difficulty, but as the only ground solid enough to stand on when difficulty arrives.